Southampton, England. April 10, 1912. As the largest passenger ship on Earth prepared to leave the harbor, thousands gathered along the docks to watch. The wealthy arrived in polished coats. Servants carried luggage larger than some families could afford in a year. Musicians played. Reporters called it the safest ship ever built. But deep below the polished staircases and expensive dining halls, hundreds of third-class passengers were already discovering something disturbing. The doors around them were locked. And 4 days later, many of them would die trying to escape a ship they had paid everything to board. This is the story of why third-class passengers barely escaped Titanic. Not the myth. Not the romantic movie version. But the real human story buried underneath the luxury. The dream of a new life. Most third-class passengers were not tourists. They were immigrants. Families. Laborers. Young mothers. Children. Entire generations trying to escape poverty. For many of them, boarding Titanic was not simply travel. It was a final gamble. Some came from Ireland. Others came from Norway, Sweden, Finland, Lebanon, Syria, and Eastern Europe. Many had sold almost everything they owned to afford passage to America. Some believed the United States would give them work. Others believed it would simply give them survival. The tickets were cheaper in third class. But cheap did not mean comfortable. Entire families slept in small cabins deep inside the lower decks. The air smelled of machinery, wet steel, and coal smoke. Long narrow hallways twisted through the bottom sections of the ship. And unlike first-class passengers, many third-class travelers had never seen a vessel this large before. They did not know the layout. They did not know the exits. And most importantly, they did not know how difficult it would become to reach the upper decks if disaster ever came. Titanic was not just divided by cabins. It was divided by status. The ship itself reflected the social hierarchy of the early 1900s. First-class passengers enjoyed grand staircases, luxury dining rooms, smoking lounges, heated swimming pools, libraries, private promenades, and personal servants. Second-class passengers lived comfortably. But third-class passengers were physically separated from the wealthy. This separation was intentional. At the time, immigration laws in the United States required health inspections for immigrants. Shipping companies feared disease outbreaks among passengers. So barriers and gates separated classes to prevent direct mixing. Some gates were meant for health regulations. Others were simply about maintaining social order. Wealthy passengers did not want lower-class immigrants wandering freely through luxury sections. So Titanic became a floating version of society itself. Luxury above. Poverty below. And during the sinking, that separation would become deadly. Third-class life was not entirely miserable. Compared to many older ships, Titanic's steerage accommodations were considered surprisingly modern. Passengers had running water, electric lighting, shared dining areas, and in some cases, enough food to make the journey feel hopeful. At night, immigrants sang songs. Children played in narrow hallways. Families talked about America. Some practiced English phrases. Others discussed jobs waiting for them in New York. But there was also uncertainty. Many passengers had never traveled across the ocean before. The Atlantic was violent. The lower decks shook constantly from engines. The sounds of machinery echoed through the walls day and night. And despite Titanic's beauty, third-class passengers always understood where they stood socially. They were passengers. But they were not treated equally. By April 14th, Titanic had already received multiple ice warnings from nearby ships. Messages warned about dangerous ice fields directly ahead. Some captains slowed their ships. Titanic did not. The ship continued moving at high speed through freezing waters. The ocean that night was unusually calm. There were no waves breaking against icebergs. No moonlight. Just darkness. At 11:40 p.m., lookouts finally saw the iceberg. The warning bell rang. Iceberg right ahead. The crew turned sharply. But the ship was too large. Too fast. The iceberg scraped along Titanic's side. Steel plates buckled open. Water began flooding into the lower compartments. And the first people to understand the danger were not the wealthy passengers above. It was the people sleeping closest to the flooding. The third class. At first, many immigrants did not understand what had happened. Some felt a strange vibration. Others heard grinding metal. Then cold water began entering cabins. Passengers woke in confusion. Children cried. Some men stepped into hallways only to find water already spreading across the floors. For many third-class passengers, language became another barrier. Titanic carried people from many countries. Not everyone spoke English. Instructions from crew members became difficult to understand. Some passengers were told to stay calm. Others were told to return to cabins. But the situation was already collapsing. Water climbed slowly at first. Then faster. And soon hundreds of people began trying to move upward through a maze-like ship they barely understood. Titanic had been designed to impress. But during the sinking, its complicated structure became dangerous. Third-class passengers had to navigate long passageways, staircases, barriers, and unfamiliar routes while the ship tilted deeper into the ocean. Some corridors were already flooding. Others were blocked. Witnesses later described groups of immigrants wandering in circles trying to find exits. The ship had enough lifeboats for only a fraction of everyone aboard. But many third-class passengers did not even reach the boat deck in time to compete for seats. This is where one of the biggest historical debates begins. Were third-class passengers physically locked below deck? The answer is complicated. Some gates were indeed closed. Some barriers delayed movement. Some crew members controlled access to upper sections. But historians still debate whether there was a coordinated effort to trap third-class passengers. What is undeniable is that the lower-class passengers faced far greater obstacles escaping. And those delays cost lives. As crew members prepared lifeboats, another brutal reality appeared. The evacuation itself was chaotic. Officers enforced women and children first. But not equally. First-class passengers were physically closer to the lifeboats. They had better information. And they had easier access to the upper decks. Meanwhile, many third-class families were still trying to understand where to go. Some fathers helped wives and children upward but were forced to stay behind. Others never reached the lifeboats at all. One survivor later described crowds pressing against barriers while panic spread through the corridors. Children became separated from parents. Language confusion worsened the fear. The ship's orchestra continued playing music above deck. But below deck, many families were already realizing they might not survive. Time became the enemy. Titanic was sinking slowly enough to create hope. But quickly enough to destroy it. At first, some passengers refused to believe the ship could actually sink. After all, newspapers had called it nearly unsinkable. Even some crew members underestimated the disaster in the early stages. This hesitation delayed evacuation. Several lifeboats left half-empty during the beginning of the sinking. Meanwhile, hundreds of third-class passengers were still trapped below trying to find routes upward. That contrast would later become one of the most haunting symbols of Titanic. Space existed in some boats. But time did not. Many third-class passengers traveled as entire families. That made evacuation even more difficult. Parents refused to abandon children. Wives refused to leave husbands. And husbands often stayed behind hoping they would reunite later. But Titanic's final hour destroyed those hopes. One father reportedly placed his wife and children into a lifeboat before stepping back into the crowd. They never saw him again. Another mother wandered the deck searching for missing family members while lifeboats launched into darkness. Some children became orphans within minutes. Others disappeared into the freezing Atlantic beside their parents. Unlike the wealthy passengers whose stories filled newspapers afterward, many immigrant victims left behind almost no records. No diaries. No famous photographs. No surviving relatives with influence. History remembered the luxury of Titanic. But many of the poor simply vanished into the ocean. By around 1:30 a.m., the situation became impossible to hide. The front of Titanic was sinking lower. The angle of the deck increased. Panic spread faster. Crew members struggled to maintain order. Some lifeboats launched with frightened passengers who did not even know if rescue would come. Behind them, hundreds remained on deck. And below them, many more were still trapped inside the ship. Water rushed deeper into lower compartments. Boilers exploded. Lights flickered. The sound of machinery echoed through the hull. Some passengers climbed over railings. Others prayed. Some accepted death quietly. And in the freezing darkness, class distinctions that had shaped the voyage began collapsing beside the ship itself. At approximately 2:20 a.m., Titanic disappeared beneath the Atlantic Ocean. More than 1,500 people died. The water temperature was deadly. Most victims in the ocean survived only minutes before hypothermia shut down their bodies. Screams filled the darkness. Then gradually, silence. Lifeboat survivors later described the sounds as something they never forgot. Hundreds of people freezing to death in the water. Calling for help. Then slowly disappearing. The survival statistics exposed the class divisions clearly. First-class women and children survived at far higher rates. Third-class passengers suffered devastating losses. Especially men. Many immigrant families lost fathers, brothers, mothers, and children all at once. Entire futures disappeared in one night. For wealthy survivors, there were newspaper interviews, sympathy from society, and public attention. Some bodies were never recovered. Some families in Europe waited weeks for news that never came. Others learned the truth from newspapers before official confirmation arrived. The dream of America ended at the bottom of the Atlantic. After the disaster, investigations began in both the United States and Britain. Questions spread quickly. Why were there not enough lifeboats? Why did Titanic continue through dangerous ice fields at high speed? And why did third-class passengers struggle so much to reach safety? Testimonies revealed confusion. Delays, locked barriers, poor communication, and unequal access to lifeboats. The disaster forced major changes in maritime law. Future ships were required to carry enough lifeboats for everyone aboard. But none of those reforms helped the people already dead.